I have seen a lot of things walk through my courtroom doors in 38 years on this bench. I have seen arrogance. I have seen contempt. I have seen defendants who believed the room owed them something simply for showing up. But what walked through my doors on the morning of April 7th at exactly 10:15 a.m. was something I had not encountered in quite that form before. A 26-year-old woman who laughed, not nervously, not accidentally. She laughed the way someone laughs when they have decided that nothing in the room is serious enough to require their full attention. She laughed at the charges. She laughed at the process. And when she finally looked at me from across the courtroom, she laughed at something I said. That was the last mistake she made in my courtroom. Before I tell you what Vivian Hargrove did on the morning of March 3rd, before I tell you what she said when she opened her mouth, and what happened when that laughter finally met something it could not move, I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel and hit that bell notification, because we bring you exactly this kind of story every single week. And drop a comment before we go any further. Tell me, have you ever watched someone treat a serious situation like a joke because they believed their money made them untouchable? Tell me what happened. Tell me if anyone stopped them, because what you are about to see is what stopping them actually looks like. Now, let us begin. Her name was Vivian Hargrove, 26 years old, the only daughter of Elliot Hargrove, founder and CEO of Hargrove Capital Group, a private equity firm with assets under management that placed it comfortably in the top tier of its industry. Elliot Hargrove was worth, by the most conservative public estimates, somewhere north of $1.4 billion. He had appeared on 3 magazine covers in the past 2 years. His name was attached to a wing of the Children's Hospital downtown, to the endowment of a local university's business school, and to the kind of charitable giving that generates press releases and photographed galas.
Buckle up, guys. Today we are going to break down one of the most satisfying courtroom takedowns ever caught on record. A judge with 38 years on the bench opens up about the strangest defendant she has ever faced. A 26-year-old heiress who walked into her courtroom laughing at the charges, laughing at the process, laughing at everything except the one thing that was about to change her life. Stick around, because what happens next shows exactly what happens when arrogance meets a judge who refuses to back down. Subscribe before we dive in.
And the specific social currency that money buys when it wants to be seen as something more than money. Vivian had grown up inside all of that. She had grown up in houses that had staff. She had grown up with attorneys on retainer before she was old enough to understand what an attorney was. She had grown up learning through every interaction her environment provided that problems were things that happened to other people, and that the ones that reached her would be handled before they required her direct attention. She was 26 years old, and she had never, not once in her life, sat in a room where her father's name did not eventually resolve the situation. She was about to sit in one. The case before me was not complicated on its surface. Vivian Hargrove had been charged with aggravated assault causing bodily harm, reckless endangerment, and filing a false police report. The events that produced those charges had taken place on the afternoon of March 3rd in the parking structure of the Meridian Shopping Center on the west side of the city. Before I tell you what happened in that parking structure, I want to tell you about the woman Vivian Hargrove put in the hospital. Because in cases like this, it matters. Not because some people deserve more justice than others. Every person who walks through those gallery doors is entitled to equal protection under the law. But because...
Here the story introduces Vivian Hargrove, daughter of billionaire Elliot Hargrove, a woman raised inside wealth so extreme she had never once faced a consequence her father's name couldn't erase. Then the focus shifts to Nora Osei, a 44-year-old emergency room nurse who immigrated from Ghana with $40 and built an entire life through nothing but relentless work. Two completely different worlds are about to collide in a parking lot, and only one of these women has any idea how serious this is about to become.
What was done to Nora Osei cannot be fully understood without understanding who Nora Osei is. Nora was 44 years old. She had emigrated from Ghana at the age of 19 with $40, a suitcase, and an address for a cousin she had never met. She had spent the following 25 years building a life in this city through the specific and unglamorous work of showing up every day and doing more than was asked of her. She had worked her way through a community college nursing program while holding 2 jobs. She had spent 15 years as a registered nurse at the city's largest public hospital, working the night shift in the emergency department, the shift nobody wanted, the shift that paid the same as the day shift and asked twice as much. She had 2 children. She had bought her home 8 years ago, the first person in her family to own property in this country. She drove a 7-year-old sedan that she maintained herself because she had taught herself basic mechanics from videos on the internet, because that was the kind of person she was. On the afternoon of March 3rd, Nora Osei was at the Meridian Shopping Center on her day off, picking up a birthday gift for her daughter. She had found a parking space on the 2nd level and was pulling in when Vivian Hargrove's white Range Rover appeared behind her, horn already sounding. Vivian wanted that space. Nora was already in it. What followed was captured by the parking structure's security system on 4 separate cameras from 3 different angles. Vivian got out of her Range Rover. She walked to Nora's driver's side window and knocked on it. When Nora lowered the window to speak with her, Vivian reached through it, grabbed Nora's car keys from the ignition.
On March 3rd, Vivian wanted Nora's parking spot badly enough to reach through her car window, rip the keys from the ignition, and hurl them across the garage. While Nora retrieved them, Vivian rammed forward into the space, slamming the open door into her and knocking her into a concrete pillar. Nora suffered a fractured collarbone, a concussion, and 14 stitches. Vivian then lied to security and filed a false police report claiming she was the victim, setting the stage for a courtroom battle security footage would completely destroy.
And threw them across the parking structure. They landed approximately 30 feet away near a concrete pillar. Nora got out of her car to retrieve her keys. While she was doing so, Vivian got back into her Range Rover and pulled forward into Nora's space, striking the open driver's side door of Nora's sedan as she did. The impact knocked Nora sideways into the concrete pillar. Nora Osei sustained a fractured collarbone, a deep laceration above her left ear that required 14 stitches, and a concussion that kept her out of work for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of night shifts at the emergency department. 3 weeks of income that she had already spent on her mortgage and her children's school fees, and the birthday gift still sitting in a bag in the back of the car with the damaged door. When security arrived, Vivian Hargrove told them that Nora had attacked her vehicle. She told them that she had been defending herself. She told them that the woman on the ground had initiated contact. She said it all with the calm fluency of someone who had decided before she opened her mouth which version of events would be most useful. She filed a formal police report an hour later, making the same claim. The security footage made all of that impossible to maintain. But Vivian's attorney had filed 3 procedural motions before the case reached my courtroom, each one designed to delay, complicate, and exhaust. That is the strategy when the evidence is not on your side. You do not fight the evidence. You make the process expensive enough that the other side gives up. Nora Osei did not give up. She had a legal aid attorney named Dennis Park who had reviewed the footage and agreed to take the case on contingency because, in his words to her, this one is not close. The case came to my courtroom on April 7th. Vivian arrived 11 minutes late. Not slightly late. Not caught in traffic late. 11 minutes late, with the specific, unhurried quality of someone who has decided that scheduled times are suggestions rather than obligations. Her attorney had been in the room for 8 minutes already, visibly uncomfortable. When Vivian finally came through the door, she was on her phone. She finished the call before she sat down. She did not acknowledge the delay. I said, Miss Hargrove, this court was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. It is now 10:11. Do you have something you would like to say to the court about that? She looked up at me. She had large sunglasses pushed up on top of her head that she had not removed when she entered the building. She said, traffic was genuinely insane today. You know how it is. Her attorney closed his eyes briefly. I said, Miss Hargrove, this is a courtroom. When you are scheduled to appear before me at 10 a.m., I expect you here at 10 a.m. The court's time is not subordinate to your schedule. Do we understand each other? She shrugged. She said, sure. And she smiled, not nervously. The smile of someone who has assessed the room and decided it does not require her respect. I noted it. I said nothing further about it. I have learned in 38 years.
Vivian strolls into court 11 minutes late, still finishing a phone call, sunglasses pushed up on her head like she owns the room. When the judge questions her tardiness, she brushes it off with a shrug and a smile that says none of this matters to her. Her attorney tries to frame the assault as a mutual, accidental altercation, but the judge isn't buying the performance. What she says next cracks the calm facade Vivian walked in wearing, and the courtroom senses the shift immediately.
Years that the courtroom has its own patience. You do not need to hurry it. I called the case. I reviewed the charges. Vivian's attorney rose immediately and began. His client, he said, had been involved in a confrontational situation in a public space. The parking incident had been mutual in its origins. Ms. Hargrove had felt threatened. Her actions had been defensive in nature. The injuries sustained by the plaintiff, while regrettable, were the result of an accident rather than intent. He said all of this with the professional smoothness of someone who had rehearsed it enough times that it no longer required thinking. I looked at Vivian. I said, Ms. Hargrove, do you understand the charges before this court? She glanced at her attorney, as if checking whether she needed to answer. Then she looked back at me and said, I understand that this has been completely blown out of proportion. It was a parking space. It was a parking space, I repeated. She said, people get into arguments over parking spaces every day. I don't understand why this is a criminal matter. I said, Miss Hargrove, you reached through another person's car window and removed her keys from her ignition. You then struck her vehicle while she was outside retrieving those keys, knocking her into a concrete pillar. She sustained a fractured collarbone and a concussion, and you filed a police report claiming she had attacked you. Is that your understanding of what happened? She said, that is not an accurate characterization. I said, we have footage from 4 cameras. Let us watch it together, and you can tell me where my characterization is inaccurate. Her attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, my client... I held up one hand. We watched the footage. The courtroom watched Vivian Hargrove pull up behind a car that was already parking. They watched her get out. They watched her reach through the window. They watched the keys arc through the air and land near the pillar. They watched Nora get out of her car and walk toward them. They watched Vivian pull forward into the space, the Range Rover's front corner catching the open door, the door catching Nora, Nora going sideways into the concrete. The courtroom was silent when the footage ended. I looked at Vivian Hargrove. She said, she should have moved faster. The gallery made a sound I had to let settle before I could continue. She should have moved faster, I said slowly. Vivian's attorney put his hand on her arm. She shook it off. She said, I had places to be. If she had just moved her car when I asked, none of this would have happened. I don't see why I'm being held responsible for her choices. I have been on this bench for 38 years. I have heard defendants explain away serious harm with logic so inverted it required a moment to fully process. But I want you to understand what I was looking at across that courtroom. I was not looking at someone who did not understand what she had done. I was looking at someone who understood perfectly and had decided it was acceptable. Those are different things. The first can be corrected through consequence. The second requires something more. I said, Miss Hargrove, The woman you put in the hospital works night shifts in an emergency department. She spent 15 years caring for people at their most fragile. She bought a home. She raised children. She was on her day off buying a birthday present for her daughter when you reached through her window and took her keys. And you are telling this court that the problem was that she did not move fast enough. Vivian met my eyes without difficulty. She said, "With respect, Your Honor, I think you are being a little dramatic." The room went completely still. I removed my glasses. I said, "I beg your pardon." She said, "I just mean it was an accident. People get hurt in accidents. That does not make it a crime." My father's legal team has handled situations like this before, and they have always been resolved without. I said, "Miss Hargrove, stop." She stopped. I said, "Your father's legal team is not in this courtroom. You are. And I want to be very precise with you about something. You have just told me that I am being dramatic. You have just told me that situations like this are typically resolved without the inconvenience of a courtroom. You said this while a woman who spent 3 weeks unable to work because of what you did is sitting in this gallery right now. I want you to look at her." Vivian did not look. I said, "Miss Hargrove, I asked you to look at Nora Osei." Slowly, with the specific reluctance of someone performing compliance they resent, Vivian turned toward the gallery. Nora Osei was sitting in the 3rd row. She was wearing her nurse's scrubs because she had come directly from a night shift.